If you're born in Canada, the United States, or Western Europe, there's a quiet assumption built into your life that if countries are poor, it's because they're behind. Behind in technology, behind in education, behind in governance. That given enough time, aid, and effort, they'll eventually catch up. But what if this story is wrong? What if these countries didn't fail to develop, but rather they developed in the exact way that the global system required them to? According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, more money is sent from the world's poorest countries to the world's richest countries than vice versa every single year. Some years, over $2 trillion flows from the world's poorest countries to the world's richest countries through debt repayment, profit repatriation, and capital flight. This means the world's poorest countries are financing the world's richest ones. Most lower income nations spend more on debt repayments than on their healthcare system. Many spend more on the interest of their loans to foreign creditors than educating their entire population. So when we ask, why don't these countries invest in development? The real answer is with what money? This inequality is not inherent to society. It is rather a byproduct of our contemporary global system. In 1820, prior to the Industrial Revolution fully reshaping global economies, global wealth inequality was relatively low. The world's richest countries were only about 4 to 5 times larger than the world's poorest. Flash forward to 1930, that number grew to 30 times richer. By 2014, it grew to 70 times richer. Nowadays, the world's richest countries are 90 times richer than the world's poorest. Economists call this the Great Divergence, the point in which the industrial economies of the world shot upwards and kept the rest of the world behind. But here's what rarely gets said. Many of the countries that we now call underdeveloped or developing were not poor prior to integration into the global capitalist economy. India, for example, controlled roughly 25% of the world's manufacturing output in 1715. West Africa had some of the world's most thriving textile industries and regional trade networks. They didn't fail to modernize. Instead, subsidized European imports flooded local markets, and local production fell dramatically. Not because local production was inefficient, but rather because it couldn't compete with European industrialization. They were absorbed into a global economy in which they were assigned a specific role, and that role was not innovation, it was extraction. This is where global capitalism comes in. Global capitalism doesn't spread development evenly. It spreads profit opportunities. High-value activities like advanced manufacturing, finance, and intellectual property are maintained in high-income countries. Meanwhile, low-value activities like environmentally destructive labor, raw materials, and cheap labor are kept in low-income countries. This is not accidental. This is a result of profit maximization on a global scale. And once a country is locked into importing expensive goods and exporting cheap goods, wealth will naturally flow outwards. Let's talk about chocolate. Over 60% of the world's cocoa is produced in just 2 countries, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. If wealth was determined by effort alone, these should be some of the world's wealthiest countries. They're not. The average cocoa farmer earns less than $2 a day. Meanwhile, the global chocolate industry is worth over $150 billion every year. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, by contrast, only receive 5% of these revenues. So what is happening? The first and most obvious question is, why doesn't Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire process their beans? Why do they export their beans instead of manufacturing chocolate? The answer is uncomfortable. It's because our current global system makes it incredibly difficult to do so, on purpose, through 3 methods. First, trade rules. Raw beans can enter European and North American markets with near 0% tariffs, but finished cocoa products like cocoa butter, cocoa powder, and finished chocolate face significantly higher tariffs. This creates a structural disincentive for producing countries to build their own production capacity. For multinational companies, it also creates an incentive to buy raw beans from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire and process them in facilities in North America or Europe. Second, corporate power. A few multinational firms already control consumer markets, firms like Nestle, Mars, and Barry Callebaut. If Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire tried to compete with them, they'd almost certainly fail against firms that already control consumer markets. Third, politics. For countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, being a supplier of raw cocoa means having governments that are reliable and market friendly. Western institutions and governments leverage Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire through aid, loans, and investment. When governments cooperate, they're supported, even if corruption persists. But if Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire strive for economic independence, then they're met with economic restrictions or even political intervention. Ghana alone has faced both of these retaliatory measures. The European Union applies 0% tariffs on raw cocoa beans from Ghana, but it applies 7 to 10% tariffs on semi-finished cocoa products like cocoa butter and cocoa powder, and 25% tariffs on finished chocolate to de-incentivize Ghana from industrializing. In more extreme circumstances, economic independence has been met with political intervention. Ghana's former president, Kwame Nkrumah, led an economic campaign of industrialization and nationalization of Ghanaian resources. His government quickly fell to a US-supported coup d'etat in 1966. The new government quickly backtracked Nkrumah's economic program and privatized large swaths of the Ghanaian economy, stopping industrialization in its track. These methods do not just shape cocoa-producing countries, it shapes the entire global south. Early advantages from industrialization were reinvested into marketing, into branding, and most importantly, into controlling consumer markets. Meanwhile, countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire had to sell raw beans just to pay off their debts or even just the interest of their debts, making thinking of industrialization impossible. The message is clear. It isn't about laziness or corruption. It's about a system that ensures that wealth flows out and not in. What we are seeing in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire is what many scholars call neo-colonialism. Former colonial control may have ended, but the economic structures that underpin colonialism never did. The real question isn't whether Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are going to develop. It's whether we are willing to redesign the rules to allow their development. To restore equality, Western countries must take concrete actions. We must cancel unpayable debts that strain resources of the global south. We must reform trade rules to allow value-added production. We must share technologies to end the monopolies of multinational firms. And we must change the benchmark of success from GDP growth alone to human well-being. Only after these measures have been met can aid truly be meaningful and not extractive. Because the true tragedy isn't that these countries aren't developed, it's that we've built a system in which they were unable to do so. Thank you.